Joining us is former Ohio State Senate Minority Leader and American University School of Public Affairs Executive in Residence, Capri Cafaro, along with former Massachusetts State Co-Chairman for Trump's presidential campaign and U.S. Senate candidate for Massachusetts, Jeff Deal. Jeff, back in 1999, the Senate voted to acquit President Clinton of both articles of impeachment. What is your take on this, that he raises this issue now?
Well, Dagan, thank you for having me on. And I will say it's hard to believe that President Clinton is making this comment after he was given such a pass, whether it was Whitewater or whether it was Travelgate, to the point where his wife ended up scrubbing a server and seemed to be getting a complete pass. So very ironic that he would be making these accusations.
Capri, I look at it from this point of view that Hillary Clinton has not really been out there campaigning in the midterm elections for the most part. She did endorse Governor Cuomo in New York recently.
Right.
And President Clinton has been largely absent, but he kind of comes out with this whopper. And I say that because the special counsel investigation is still ongoing. We don't have a report delivered.
Right.
And he says this, that impeachment proceedings would have already been started.
Look, I think that, President Clinton he is somebody, obviously, he's gone through this before personally. His wife lost. So I think that there's just a little bit of maybe a bad taste in his mouth, if you will, over this whole impeachment thing. I think that, he's gone through this before, and I think that the only point, frankly, that I think President Clinton is making is that, if it was a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, maybe it would already be done, and vice versa. Look, there's a lot of concern that if the Democrats take back the House, that they could start the impeachment process. So, unfortunately, what has happened with impeachment is that it's become a political hammer more than a legal proceeding, and that's a problem.
Well, given what his impeachment was, the impeachment proceedings on President Clinton, what they were related to, it was kind of curious that he wasn't pressed on his thoughts on the Me Too movement, even what Kirsten, raised the issue again of where Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator, said about President Clinton that he should have resigned. And we've gotten some commentary from him on that recently. But I mean, your take on that, because again, if you're going to talk about impeachment, let's talk about all of it, Capri.
I think we also need to put some context into this interview. Apparently, Bill Clinton just wrote some sort of a political thriller with John Patterson.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's doing these interviews as part of a book tour. But sure, I mean, I've always said you got to be equitable in these conversations, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you're going to have the conversation surrounding this, then sure, I mean, be fair and have a conversation about the reasons behind impeachment, which were not just Monica Lewinsky, but frankly about lying, as part of a deposition. So,
but it was related to the Lewinsky affair. I mean, the charges were directly related to that.
Right, of course. I mean, again, I think that, the Clintons, frankly, and I say this as a Democrat, and I loved Bill Clinton as a president. I was not really crazy about Hillary Clinton, but the Clintons are part of the past, and we need to move forward and redefine the Democratic Party and stop continuing to go back and relitigate things from the 1990s. We need to move forward.
President Clinton also weighed in on the mainstream media bias allegations when President Obama was in office. Listen to this.
They did treat him differently than other Democrats and Republicans because it was the political press. I don't know. They liked him. And they liked having the first African-American president. And he was a good president, I think.
Well, I want to get your thoughts on this, Jeff, because, again, he's weighing in on some very serious topics. And he definitely seems upset about the way that he was treated toward the end of his presidency, whether it was the impeachment proceedings. In the big picture, how does this help Republicans and hurt Democrats going into November?
Well, I will say that Bill Clinton's absolutely right that President Obama was given a pass on many things as well. Fast and Furious, Benghazi, which was a combination of Hillary Clinton and President Obama's administration. The press seemed to just continually ignore and whitewash all that was going on there. Now, at the same time, Donald Trump can't seem to catch a break. The DOJ, the FBI, the IRS have been weaponized against conservatives for the last, I don't know how many years, and all of this pointing to, collusion within the government, trying to keep Republicans from having any success. So I think, again, Bill Clinton needs to probably moderate his conversation about, unfairness and talk about the fact that I think even President Trump is being treated unfairly.
And Capri, I just did want to point out that President Clinton he was asked about the Kirsten Gillibrand saying that he should resign, and his response was it was all over the place. She's living in a different context, and she did it for different reasons, so I just disagree with her, he said during that interview. We just didn't play the clip. But what were you going to say?
What is he going to say? I mean, what does someone say to that? I mean, Kirsten Gillibrand is obviously angling to run for president in 2020, and certainly she wanted to, capture on that Me Too movement and take a stand. But what is President Clinton going to say? Yeah, I should have resigned. I mean, he's in a tough spot. But I think that conversation that we're having here is, why is President Clinton maybe not having as honest of a dialogue as I think people are maybe hoping from him? Right.
Well, Philippe Reines called Kirsten Gillibrand a hypocrite. President Clinton could have done that and said, given the support that she got from the Clintons, maybe that's one word he could have used. Meantime, former Vice President Joe Biden isn't ruling out a 2020 presidential bid while he continues to campaign for other Democrats. Biden's team is said to be outlining what his campaign could look like and will likely decide by the end of the year if he will run. This is according to reporting by NBC News. Capri, your reaction to this?
I said earlier, we need to move forward and we need to have some new blood into the Democratic Party. Our bench is actually pretty weak. And, I come from the state of Ohio. A guy like Joe Biden really connects with, my people in the Rust Belt, coming from Scranton. He's a straight shooter. And while he is old, so is President Trump. I think that Joe Biden regrets not running in 2016. A lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda there. And I think that he has a better shot than some of the more progressive names that we're hearing, like Elizabeth Warren and the like. So it's not an ideal situation, but if Joe Biden does run, he would be certainly somebody that I would support because I think he could connect with those Trump crossover Democrats.
Well, Jeff, he's certainly somebody who can talk to people who don't live on the East Coast in major cities and basically Los Angeles and San Francisco. He does know how to talk to the everyman and the everywoman.
Yeah, no, Dagan, and I think it was interesting. My opponent, Elizabeth Warren, was in Ohio just a few weeks ago stumping for a Democrat governor's candidate because I think she's trying to grease the skids for a 2020 run, obviously. But showing that Joe Biden's out there thinking that he has a chance of running just, I think, is a good example of why Elizabeth Warren has no chance of becoming the nominee for 2020. She's done nothing for Massachusetts, no credits to take, nothing to take credit for, and now she's basically wants re-election so she can spend 2 more years doing nothing for Massachusetts. That's why I'm running this race, to make sure that people know they have a choice in November to have someone who's going to work for them down in Washington, D.C. versus someone who doesn't even have a chance to run in 2020.
Capri, it was good to see you as always. Capri Cafera.
Absolutely.
And
Thank
Jeff
you.
Deal. Thanks for coming on.
For all the uproar over Roseanne's racist tweet, the media have been far more restrained over another outrage. Samantha Bee, the host of Full Frontal on TBS, went off on the president's daughter, as you know, for the sin of posting a picture with her child with the worst word in the English language that you can use against a woman.
You know, Ivanka, that's a beautiful photo of you and your child, but let me just say, one mother to another, do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless. He listens to you. Put on something tight and low-cut and tell your father to stop it.
After the White House denounced her, Bee said this on Twitter: "I'd like to sincerely apologize to Ivanka Trump and to my viewers for using an expletive on my show to describe her last night. It was inappropriate and inexcusable. I crossed the line, and I deeply regret it." Joining us now, Emily Jashinsky, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, and Richard Fowler, radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Emily, until the White House denounced Sam Bee's language as vicious and vile, I read all the media reports on this. They were all like, wow, did you see what Sam said? Yeah. not reaching the Roseanne level of outrage until maybe later.
Some of the initial media reports were almost like in some of the liberal outlets were almost applauding her, like, oh, this is kind of funny. And so that was really interesting. And I actually don't think, I'm glad you played the second part of that clip because most people stopped it after she used that word.
Yes.
And it goes on to get, I mean, I think also very inappropriate. And so what's interesting about all of this is I don't think Samantha Bee would have ever had to apologize. I don't think we would still be talking about this. I certainly don't think she would have had the will to apologize if it hadn't happened in such proximity to the Roseanne Barr incident.
Which actually makes it all the more, I guess stupid would be the right word, to do that and do it in a pre-taped segment. And by the way, you know, they were initially proud of it. The executive producer, Miles Kahn, wrote, so, feckless C word seems to be trending. Now, some others have denounced it, CNN's Brooke Baldwin and others, but do you think she would still be employed if she had used that awful word against, I don't know, Michelle Obama?
Well, I mean, I think the word is vile, right? Let's start there. And I think what makes it even more interesting is I think you're right, Howard, in that the only reason why we're having this conversation about Samantha Bee is because it happens so close to Roseanne, which has allowed conservatives to point to this double standard. But I don't think you can conflate the two cases, and the Roseanne case in particular. And if you talk to folks at ABC, they will tell you that Roseanne, not only does she have a history of bad behavior, but since getting the show, she has been warned about her behavior over and over and over again. So this is like sort of the third strike for Roseanne, which allowed them to say, you're out the door. In Samantha Bee's situation, is her language vile? Absolutely. But the case is different here because we don't know what is happening between her and the TBS executives. But is it vile? Is it wrong? Is there a double standard that the conservatives can point to? I think there might be here.
I agree that they're different. But I also think that lets Samantha Bee off the hook. And especially you pointed to the second part where she says, put on something tight and low cut and tell your father to change his effing immigration policy. That is the same low blow that Bill Maher did a few while back about joking about an incestuous relationship. And somehow, like, it's okay to do that to the president's daughter?
Yeah, actually, none of this was a dramatic departure from the way a lot of liberals in the media talk about the relationship between Ivanka and Donald Trump. And so I do think that these are not apples to apples. I think what Roseanne said absolutely was worse. But in the same way, they are different because what Samantha Bee said went through layers of bureaucracy. It was written down. It was very much premeditated, which makes it very different in another way as well.
All right. Let me move on to the case of Joy Reid, MSNBC weekend host, and she had already apologized for some decade-old posts on her blog that were very, very homophobic, I mean, really offensively homophobic. And now she's apologized again, among other things. She seems to have been years ago a 9/11 truther. She was promoting an Alex Jones film, charging that the 9/11 attacks were carried out by the U.S. government. Richard?
I mean, I think the blog post is pretty insane. Here's my thought on this particular case. I do believe that everybody has a past, and everybody's past is murky, depending upon how you spin it or how you look at it. I do believe that Joy should have a chance to explain herself, but I do think that the rope here is running a little short, and she's running out of rope, and so I think she's got to explain herself pretty quickly to the American
But on that point, she did again apologize online, but said nothing on her show yesterday about this. She certainly had that platform, and you know, let's put up a picture that she had posted. It was a Photoshop thing involving John McCain, sort of grafted onto the Virginia Tech shooter. And so MSNBC says in a statement, well, you know, some of this is hateful, but she's grown and evolved. No real accountability. I mean, it's a long time ago, but there's so much of it, Emily.
Yes. And at first, I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt and say, you have evolved. We should absolutely have room for that. It's been more than 10 years in some of these cases, but it's turned out to be so much. And the worst part, and what I cannot wrap my head around, is the fact that she pretty much clearly fabricated a cover-up story about hackers, and she's supposed to be a journalist, and MSNBC is running ads touting her as one of their stars, one of their star journalists, and still hasn't gotten around to that.
Even you would probably say that if somebody had said half of this stuff who worked for a conservative news organization, there would be a far bigger uproar than there's been about Joy Reid.
Well, let me say this from a broader context. I think we're currently living in a society where it's become so tit for tat that is like everybody deserves. It's like almost like Oprah, but instead of like handing out cards or handing out red slips, like you get fired, everybody gets fired.
Well, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the culture.
Absolutely. And I think we've got to at some point in our country and in our culture, we've got to come to this point of reckoning that says what's fireable and what's not fireable, because now it's become on the left and on the right. It's you're fired. We want somebody fired, and everybody's getting fired.
It's sort of up
we're
to
not really sure why.
To the news organization involved. But when President Trump says Disney has a double standard because they did fire Roseanne on its ABC unit, ESPN, which is owned by Disney, took no action against Jemele Hill, a sportscaster, when she called Donald Trump a white supremacist. And then Keith Olbermann has just been given an expanded role on ESPN. Here is just some of what he has said about the president.
Trump is indeed effing crazy. As mindless and as evil as the baboons policy is, it can and will be rolled back sooner or later. Congenital disease, drug use, any of a dozen post-concussion traumas, Alzheimer's, senility.
Now, Olbermann didn't say this on ESPN, but that's okay with Bob Iger, and Olbermann gets a bigger role on the sports network?
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with this larger point about partisan bloodthirst and the tit-for-tat battle. I definitely agree with that. But if what Joy Reid has done is not, when we're trying to find this line as to what's fireable, if that's not fireable, what is? I mean. But
Olbermann, you know, who used to command a big audience on MSNBC, he's called Trump a Nazi and a traitor, and it doesn't seem to hurt his career.
Well, I mean, listen, I think Keith Olbermann is problematic. I think that language is problematic. But I really feel as though, and going back to my previous point, is we as a country have to figure out, one, we've got to bring civility back. I think it's somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean right now.
All right, I'm good on that. But you can't impose a standard because every media organization has to search its conscience.
Absolutely.
When a star does this.
And how are we supposed to get back to civility when Samantha Bee is getting awards for advancing social causes? I mean, she got an award the other night, and she accepted it for advancing.
Yeah. I think she's sorry for the word, but I don't think she's sorry for the sentiment involved, and I think that's troubling. Great discussion. Richard Fowler, Emily Jashinsky. There's a lot more reporting on pundits and comedians sliming Ivanka, by the way. My book, Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War Over the Truth. I really go into it.